Hey everyone, before we continue the segment, don't forget to subscribe, like, dislike, leave a positive comment, leave a negative comment. I don't care. Thanks for watching, and now on to the program. What's up everyone? Welcome back to the final part, hopefully the final part of this Table Talks episode, being a solo session, my first solo session myself, essentially breaking down this article that I stumbled across recently titled Technate, Ohio, written by individuals named Whitney, Webb, and Mark Goodwin. I won't get into, recapping everything I've done so far, just because it's, this 4-part episode should be watched, back to back to back. It's, like any other podcast. So, hopefully, going to just knock out the rest of it. I'm going to try and read quickly. Went and used the bathroom to, get myself emptied. Got my coffee right here to get me energized in my Venom cup. So let's continue after this sip. Oh, and like I said before, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, please. Helps the channel a lot. Connect with me on LinkedIn. There will be links into everything that I've been talking about, and links in general to my sites in the description. So let's continue. This section of the article is called "Securing Questionable Tax Exemptions is Easy in Ohio." In 2013, Ohio passed a sales tax exempt that covers computer data center equipment, in addition to materials used in constructing the centers. This tax exemption remains controversial, particularly given the increase in regional electricity prices and other issues that come with new data centers. According to the January 2025 report from Police Matters Ohio, if the investments announced by Amazon, Google, and Microsoft in the past 2 years are all covered by the tax break, the state and localities could lose out on almost $1.6 billion in sales tax revenue, with only modest job creation to show for it. The positive regulation for the data center industry in Ohio does not stop there, with the report further noting the state's unique property tax amendments. Here's an example of one. In addition to the sales tax exemption, many Ohio data centers also get local subsidies through property tax amendments. It's worth noting that Ohio does not tax tangible property like data center equipment. In Virginia, the largest site for data centers, Loudoun County, received more than $600 million in property taxes from data centers in 2023, the vast bulk of which was from taxes on equipment Ohio doesn't levy. So Ohio is providing large invisible subsidies in the form of lesser property taxes on data center equipment than some other states. Some of the data center operators also receive other state subsidies. For example, even prior to its recent announcement that it would invest another $10 billion in Ohio data centers, Amazon was getting a job creation tax credit, so it is credited with much of the state income tax paid by its data center employees. According to 2024 reporting from Cleveland.com, these stadium-sized data centers from Amazon, Google, Meta, plus less familiar names like Quality Technology Services and Sirius One, often only employ 20 to 30 or so workers when operational, with some earning tax perks for promising as few as 10 new jobs. For example, Amazon's 3 data centers located in Dublin, Hilliard, and New Albany received about $100 million in state subsidies, according to a 2016 report from Good Jobs First. These tax breaks, while leading the minimum employment boosts, are no small factor within Amazon's $7.8 billion plans to build more than 24 data centers in central Ohio. Final approvals for the next tax exemptions are made by the Ohio Tax Credit Authority, which itself is a division of the Ohio Development Services Agency, the director of which is notably chosen by the governor of Ohio. Coffee. Public sector subsidies and tax exemptions carry a unique history in Ohio and have been routinely exploited by Wexner-controlled business interests for several decades. Take, for example, the Limited's efforts to relocate the CIA's Southern Air Transport to the Columbus Air Reckenbacker Airport in 1995. Wexner's The Limited Inc., then under the power of attorney of Jeffrey Epstein, specifically sought out not one, but two CIA-linked airlines to run its cargo during that period. Gotta have connections to the intelligence agencies if you want to be as successful as someone like Wexner. You know, it doesn't just stop at, having a crap load of money and influencing the people within the areas that you live to do things for you. You also, need to take it much, much higher up the food chain and, get in contact and do negotiations and business with the Central Intelligence Agency. Wild. As noted in One Nation Under Blackmail, beginning in 1992, the Limited began to be linked to efforts of different airlines to relocate or set up a major presence at Reckenbacker. The first of these was the Russian state-owned airline Aeroflot, which created a North American subsidiary called North American Aeroflot, N.A. Wexner's The Limited was the main force behind N.A. and its activities at Reckenbacker. NAA's activities at Reckenbacker also intimately involved Aero Air, a CIA-linked airline that had smuggled weapons as a part of the Iran-Contra operation. Love that. Really love it. Less than a month after NAA Aero Air began running cargo through Reckenbacker, the main CIA-linked Iran-Contra airline, Southern Air Transport, SAT, began its own efforts to become the dominant force at Reckenbacker. SAT first cloaked its initial attempts via the company Polar Air Cargo, which was comprised of three companies, SAT, Polaris Corp, and Nedmark. At the time, SAT had the same owner it had during the Iran-Contra, former CIA lawyer James Bastian. Polar Air later dissolved its relationship with SAT and sought to expand its Columbus operation. However, the Limited wanted nothing to do with this newer iteration of Polar Air and instead began courting SAT directly. Crucial to these negotiations was a generous package of incentives from the state of Ohio that included a 75% tax credit against its corporate tax liability for the next 10 years, a $5 million low-interest loan, and a $400,000 job training grant. The package was offered by Ohio politicians in effort to please powerful Ohio businessmen, classic, namely Leslie Wexner. SAT ultimately relocated to Reckenbacker to run cargo for Wexner, Wexner's The Limited, because the incentives deal was too good to turn down. Reporting from local Ohio journalist Bob Fitrakis linked Jeffrey Epstein, who had a background in arms smuggling and was enmeshed in Wexner's finances, to the efforts to bring SAT to Columbus. Fitrakis later reported that key Iran-Contra figures like Alan Fierce Jr. and Richard Secord had also been instrumental in SAT's relocation. He also was told by both Ohio's Inspector General and Franklin County's then sheriff that had believed Epstein and Wexner had ties to the CIA. More on what the Limited may have been doing clandestinely with these airlines is discussed in One Nation Under Blackmail, but is beyond the scope of this article. If you guys aren't familiar, One Nation Under Blackmail is the book that Whitney Webb wrote, I believe. Nation. It's so funny, these people, like, not just, Whitney Webb, but just a number of people just always referencing like their work. And I mean, it'd be nice if if this article, it does have links to other, their primary and secondary sources, but it would be nice if, and obviously I know that they're just referencing it so they, can essentially, sell more copies. People read the name of the book over and over again in the article. It's bound to, make someone like myself look it up and, see what it's like. One Nation Under Blackmail, Volume 1 and 2, is a 2-volume investigative book written by Whitney Webb and published in 2002 by Trine Day. It investigates the connection between intelligence agencies, organized crime, and sexual blackmail networks, focusing on the rise of Jeffrey Epstein. So yeah, this book basically, what I just read about this book basically summarizes, who Whitney Webb is and what she does with her investigative journalism, trying to expose stuff like this. So, notably, despite the lofty promises from Ohio officials and lobbyists working for the Limited, SAT did not create the jobs it had promised, did not construct the maintenance facilities it had promised to build, and began to financially implode rather quickly despite the $3.5 million in taxpayer funds it had received, not counting the low-interest loans. SAT filed for bankruptcy in 1998, and its collapse was likely a controlled demolition, with $32 million of company funds allegedly appearing in the personal bank account of SAT's owner, James Bastian's wife, not long before it went bankrupt. In the years since, CIA-linked airlines like Landmark Aviation as well as Wexner's linked Lane Aviation made their homes at Rickenbacker. Those two airlines, after heavy lobbying from the local businessmen, saw local law change yet again in 2011. Can clear private planes without regular custom checks at the private terminal they control at Rickenbacker. Crazy. Dollars and drones, Anduril and Erebor. I think that's how you say it. If you don't know what Anduril and Erebor are, they're both corporations. I believe Erebor is. Let me double check that. Yeah, okay. No. Erebor is a technology that Anduril is using. The guy, Palmer Luckey, named the technology after a mountain in, what was it, Lord of the Rings? Yeah. I barely have watched Lord of the Rings. I've seen, it maybe once or twice fully through. Not anything against it, just was never really interested in it. But, calling your piece of technology that's going to do damage to hundreds of millions of people after, something out of a fantasy is, like I said, not giving my opinions on these people that, whatever. Now Rickenbacker is due to have a new company grace. Now Rickenbacker is due to have a new company grace its airstrips. Okay. In January of 2025, Governor DeWine announced that defense contractor Anduril planned to lease property at Rickenbacker to construct a nearly $1 billion manufacturing facility dubbed Arsenal One. As illustrated in previous reporting from Unlimited Hangout, the website that this article was published on, Anduril was founded by Palmer Luckey, a longtime associate of Epstein Crony and Palantir co-founder Peter Thiel. Luckily Lucky met Thiel when he was only 19. Shortly after, Lucky founded his first company, Oculus Rift, which was later sold to Facebook while Thiel sat on the social network's board. Shortly after, Lucky founded the modern warfare equipment and drone manufacturer company Anduril was backed by Thiel's Founders Fund, only to be joined by another Palantir co-founder, Joe Lonsdale, to discuss below. Lucky's Anduril would not exist without the assistance of Thiel and several executives from Thiel's Palantir. As Unlimited Hangout has reported in numerous articles beginning in 2020, Palantir is a CIA front explicitly aimed to resurrecting the controversial surveillance dragnet once housed by the Pentagon's DARPA, known as Total Information Awareness, TIA. TIA sought to use warrantless dragnet surveillance of Americans to prevent crime and terrorism before it happened. Pre-crime, a field which Palantir has since pioneered, and which was essentially made DOJ policy by Trump's Attorney General in his first term, William Barr. Previous reporting on the founding of Anduril from Unlimited Hangout explains that the intimate connections between Lucky, Thiel, and Epstein network long before the announcement of Arsenal One coming to Central Ohio. This little passage is from a previous article. One of those Palantir executives who later came to Anduril, Trey Steffens, worked at a government intelligence agency. He declines to specify which one before joining Palantir. From there, Stevens joined Thiel's Founders Fund and ended up on the boards of some of the most controversial Founders Funds funded companies, such as Carbine 9/11, financed in part by Jeffrey Epstein and the brainchild of former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak. Carbine's platform also involves invasive data collection from civilians and predictive policing functionalities. On Carbine's board, Stevens originally sat alongside Barak, as well as Israeli intelligence-linked figures such as Pinax Bukris, I'm butchering these names for sure. Former commander of Israel's units 8200, Lital Lishem, former Israeli intelligence operative, who now works for documented CIA asset and former head of the infamous mercenary group Blackwater, Eric Prince. And Nicole Junkerman, an Epstein associate who has since rebranded as a venture capitalist in emerging technologies and fintech. Stevens remains on Carbine's board, where he now sits alongside former U.S. Homeland Security Chiefs Michael Shetroff in the Bush administration and Kirsten Nielsen in Trump administration. Thanks in part to Thiel's influence over the early Trump administration, Stevens was chosen to oversee Trump's transition team for the Defense Department, where he steered Trump's early Pentagon policies. At the time, Stevens was also in talks with Lucky to create a new company. After Lucky left Facebook under a cloud of controversy in late March of 2017, he and Stevens created Anduril, and other Palantir executives were recruited to join the company. Within a year of its existence, Anduril had already netted millions of contracts from the Department of Homeland Security. Stevens has remained at Thiel's Founders Fund since co-founding Anduril. Interesting. More names, more, doing business with one another, blah, 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 blah. One thing I definitely want to talk about in the future in a different episode is the duality between freedom and security. It's, one of the biggest controversial arguments that's been taking place since the birth of civilization. Honestly, you have this whole you have this whole background of, of what's the word I'm looking for? You have this huge amount of literature and knowledge that basically started from, arguably Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and their theories and their ideas of, what is the state, what is a citizen, what can be described as rights versus laws, so on and so forth. And it is a pretty interesting discussion these days how, like, for example, and I don't mean to just get off track from, the main topic at hand, but I just want to, put it in perspective real quick. The other day I was, driving somewhere, and this big truck in front of me clearly didn't have its luggage in the back secured tightly, and what had happened was a big piece of 2x4, not a 2x4, it was a big piece of wood had fallen off the truck, and a number of cars, including myself, had to swerve out of that piece of wood's way because it was a significantly large piece of wood, large and thick. So anyone who was going to run over it was going to definitely damage their vehicle. And the thing I thought immediately about that was, I thought about how, like, was that just unregulated in securing the luggage on that truck, or, regardless of what happened, the thing that came to my mind first was the topic of regulations and security and freedom, and and essentially thinking, like, if there's more of that, just like people, like, not regulating what they're doing, for the greater good, essentially. It's not like, going back to the whole, like, Patriot Act and stuff like that, freedom, giving up freedoms for rights, blah, blah, blah. It's like, it's that conversation that definitely needs to happen at the deepest level to get an understanding of, how both freedom and security exist together, just like how life and death exist together, just like how good and bad exist together, just like how there's another example that I'm trying to think of, free will and determinism. Freedom in the sense of, I can walk outside of my house and do whatever I want and not suffer any sort of consequences. I could, unalive my neighbors. I could blow up whatever, blah, 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 blah. And then it going to the other side of, like, okay, even if I try to, even if I say I'm going to do something like that and I, like, have a serious intention behind me saying it, law enforcement's going to show up immediately and, seize me and take me to jail because, why would you allow someone who is blatantly exposing themselves to bring about violence to continue living in a society that is trying to be peaceful? I don't have an answer to that. I try to be a good person all the time. I don't have any intention to just do whatever I want. The things that I do in my life, I fully believe that I am doing what I want. I don't need, I'm not missing anything from my life that is going to make me want to, go break laws because they're just written down to try and, tame populations. I refuse to believe that obviously there are crazy people out there, but I refuse to believe that they are aware of themselves as, me explaining this right now, in the sense of, okay, I'm just going to go out and, do everything I can to break every law possible and, I won't suffer any consequences of it. It's like I said, a whole other episode will be done on that topic specifically, freedom versus security. Would love to have, like, a debate, host a debate even, or, maybe even be part of the debate. But, it's crazy. Anyways, onward. An underreported revelation within the recent batch of Epstein files released by the Department of Justice is that Epstein likely co-invested in Anduril alongside Founders Fund via Thiel's Valar Ventures firm, specifically Valar Global Fund 3. It appears as if Epstein's invested $15 million into Valar through his Southern Trust Company in June of 2015. In an email from former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak to Epstein associate Nicole Junkerman, Barak implies that Thiel and Epstein co-owned the fund, although a spokesperson for Thiel would later deny the claims of co-ownership to the Beeline Times, while confirming that Epstein was a limited partner. In recent years, Andrew and Lucky himself have certainly grown in public notoriety, including an appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience. On that podcast, Lucky expressed the need for the United States to stop being the world police and instead become the world's gun store. Unsurprisingly, Lucky's company would be set to benefit immensely from such an international policy pivot, especially after the completion of Arsenal 1 in the Columbus area. I watched that JRE episode with Lucky on it. I had no idea who Lucky was before he had made his appearance on there. Like, I'm not going to give my opinions. I will give my opinion on what he said, though, in regards to the United States needs to stop policing the world and instead become the world's gun store. Let's think about that for a moment. We can do a whole podcast episode of the United States policing the world. That, with from regime change to the amount of military bases in foreign nations to tech billionaires now taking, total control, not just domestically, but internationally. Now imagine all of that and instead becoming the world's gun store. So instead of the United States going in and regime changing, and instead of the United States policing its own citizens to the extent it has been, and instead of it just makes one think, like, if I don't think there's really a difference in the United States being the world police and being the world's gun store, because if the United States is just going to be something of a gun store now, there's going to be a lot of policies and regulations and laws in place, and I'm sure a lot more in-depth sanction definitions to be placed on who's buying these guns, who's coming to the United States to purchase technologies of all sorts that will that won't do anything but help war continue. So absolutely ridiculous. In a story all too similar to that of booming data center expansion, the build-out of Arsenal 1 was made possible in no small part due to the massive tax breaks unanimously approved by the Ohio Tax Credit Authority. Only a couple weeks after the California-based defense contractor first expressed the intention to come to Ohio, DeWine and Ohio Department of Development Director Lydia Mihalik announced the approval of significant state tax incentives, including employment tax credits for 30 years worth an estimated $452 million. Those tax breaks were part of a massive incentive package prepared by the controversial group discussed earlier in this article, JobsOhio, along with involvement of the Wexner-linked One Columbus. The package JobsOhio, One Columbus, and their partners prepared for Andrew is larger than the one they offered to Intel in New Albany. Lucky has stated that JobsOhio's offer was an important factor in their move to Rickenbacker. I'm just seeing how much is left. Okay. Upon completion, Anduril claims that the 5 million square foot advanced manufacturing facility is geared to build drones, missiles, and other high-tech, unpiloted military weapons in order to address urgent defense needs. Yeah. Luckey has stated that Ohio is central to his company's plans, stating Ohio is going to be critical in allowing us to move fast into Arsenal 1 so that we can build sorry, I'm getting all so that we can build the arms that the United States needs to deter, when necessary, large-scale conflicts. He's talking about being, he's talking about the United States needing to be more of the world's biggest gun store versus policing the world, yet he's saying stuff like this. Very contradicting. Luckey furthered that we need to build tens of thousands of autonomous fighter jets, autonomous missiles, and other combat systems that will again deter these wars, and if they break out, win them. With the expansion of U.S. military action in Iran in March of 2026, Luckey and Anduril are situated to profit generously as Arsenal 1 is set to begin production of their first product, the autonomous fighter jet YFQ-44A, by quarter 2 of 2026, the next quarter. And yet, it is Luckey's other Ohio-based company that is arguably positioned to make even more money than selling weapons during wartime, the stablecoin bank Erebor. Luckey was a very early Bitcoiner, having expressed his involvement in the network as early as 2010, only 1 year after its creation, and choosing "Buy More Bitcoin" as his quote for the 2013 Forbes 30 Under 30. As noted in previous investigations from Unlimited Hangout, in 2024 Trump campaign, the 2024 Trump campaign made Bitcoin, stablecoins, and cryptocurrency in general a significant part of their platform, and the first year of his second administration was chock full of executive orders and new regulations enabled this behemoth of an industry. Luckey has been an outspoken partner of President Trump, including a $100,000 donation to Trump's first inauguration, and was allegedly let go from Facebook in 2017 due to his political views regarding Trump. Luckey also credits Trump's book, Art of the Deal, as inspiring to him to co-founded Oculus, and even wrote Trump a letter in 2011 urging him to run for president. Thus, it should be of little surprise that in 2025, Luckey and his crew of ardent Trump supporters, including Palantir co-founders Peter Thiel and Joe Lozendale, set out to actualize the second administration's state goal of pushing dollar hegemony through stablecoins by funding Erebor Bank. Much like Anduril and Palantir, the name of Luckey's latest venture is a J.R.R. Tolkien reference, the mountain named Erebor, which houses the dragon, I don't know how to pronounce the dragon's name, immense fortune of gold and jewels. Even though Ohio is arguably not at the forefront of financial technology, the founders of Erebor decided Columbus would serve as the grounds for their fortress of digital currencies. Erebor was controversially granted an OCC charter only 4 months after their application, notably the first granted from Trump-appointed comptroller of the currency, Jonathan Gold. With the announcement of Erebor, which includes investments from Palantir co-founders Joe Lonsdale and Peter Thiel, this was the appointment of Jacob Hirschman as co-CEO. Hirschman was previously an advisor to the Circle, including a stint of chief legal officer for the second largest U.S. dollar stablecoin issuer. Erebor's launch also noted intentions to become the most regulated entity conducting and facilitating stablecoin transactions, and to fill the void left after the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank (SVP), which occurred in no small part due to the actions of Peter Thiel's Founders Fund. Okay. Almost there, guys, promise. The rise and collapse of SVP was chronicled in a previous section of the Ultimate Hangouts, the Chain series, including noting the Circle's USDC had kept reserves at the now failed bank. The bank's collapse led Circle's stablecoin to depeg as low as 86 cents. Howard Lutnick, the longtime CEO of Cantor Fitzgerald, the holder of the world's largest stablecoin, Tether's USDT reserves, noted in the speech of the Bitcoin 2024 conference that Circle had USD, United States dollars, 3.3 billion of your reserves uninsured in the Silicon Valley Bank when it went bust. Tether's ties to the Epstein network was also investigated deeply within the Chain series, including founder Brock Pierce's intimate relationship with Epstein. Crazy stuff. I mean, it honestly hurts my head a little, and it's making my eyes a little heavy. Just reading it all, there's just this article is just so long. But I got my coffee, and it's basically room temperature now. But it's okay. Lutnick, who currently serves as Trump's Commerce Secretary, appeared at the CIA-funded Chain Analyst Conference in 2024 to express his affinity for stablecoins. Quote unquote, dollar hegemony is fundamental to the United States of America. It matters to us, to our economy. That's why I am a fan of properly backed stablecoins, Tether and Circle. During his presidential campaign in 2024, Ramaswamy took a policy position on stablecoins, claiming he would order the Federal Reserve to grant stablecoin issuers the same access to Fed facilities that incumbent banks enjoy. Ramaswamy also responded to the Tether CEO Paola Ardoino on X in March of 2025, expressing his affinity for stablecoins, helping reinforce U.S. dollars' global reserve status. As Ohio governor, he can be expected to be a friend to Erebor. This is particularly obvious when one considers that Ramaswamy's Columbus-based Strive Asset Management was seed funded by Peter Thiel and his Founders Fund, current Vice President and former Ohio Senator J.D. Vance's Naria Capital. Howard Lutnick and Cantor Fitzgerald and Erebor backed Joe Lonsdale. Crazy. A Vivek win in Ohio will mean more of the same. This is the second to last section. Vivek Ramaswamy, whose career began in venture capital after graduating with an undergrad degree in biology from Harvard, is but one of the many political stewards sprung from the power nexus Wexner and Epstein birthed in central Ohio decades ago. Much has been written about J.D. Vance's connections to Wexner and Thiel, as illustrated in a previous investigation by the Unlimited Hangout, but as far less has been spoken out about Vance's old friend and colleague and college buddy Ramaswamy, who remains just as connected to the Wexner web as our current vice president. Ramaswamy was an early adopter of the anti-woke movement, being labeled the CEO of Anti-Woke Inc. by The New Yorker, with his anti-woke investment firm Strive being bankrolled by Thiel, Vance, Lonsdale, and Lutnick. According to BitcoinTreasuries.net, Strive Asset Management now sits just outside of the top 10 largest public holders of Bitcoin in the world, with 13,311 Bitcoins. Strive strove to become the antithesis of Woke Inc. Investment firms such as BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, and yet in the process, the firm's founder has found himself mere months away from taking the throne of one of the most important states in the nation, an appointment whose legislative decisions would influence not just the region, but the world itself. Wild. While many pushed the rhetoric of Ramaswamy's sudden removal from Doge was some sort of demotion, his push to become governor of Ohio brings with it the lever to enforce state rights and establish the new anti-woke Silicon Valley in Ohio's heartland. But it is best not to get distracted by the incessant framework of woke or not woke when discussing Ramaswamy's campaign. For the very stake of for the domestic winners of the artificial intelligence arms race may very well fall into the Cincinnati native's hand. As Wexner and Epstein proved through the 20th century, local and regional governments can be bought and sold, much like the acres of land their new Albany Company has leased and sold to the up-and-coming data center behemoths. This phenomena is unfortunately quite known to Ohio, with Wexner and Epstein in effect building their own government in the New Albany area, not to mention the House Bill 6 scandal that rocked the Ohio State Senate and left 2 men dead at the end of last decade. Insane. Just when they say it like that. Ramaswamy, whose campaigns have taken immense monetary donations from the likes of Susquehanna International Group founder Jeffrey Yass, Bitcoin evangelist Ross Stevens, and Epstein associate Glenn Dubin, has spent years in the circle of the technocratic elite that grew out the Silicon Valley. In his speech at the Lincoln Day dinner in Ohio, according to reporting from the Chronicle, Ramaswamy expressed the intention to move the power nexus out of California and back into the heartland of Ohio. Quote unquote, if it was Silicon Valley leading the way the last 10 years, Ramaswamy said, it should be the Ohio River Valley the next 10 years, leading the way in manufacturing, energy, and the development of AI. As noted throughout this article, Ohio's transformation into the Silicon Heartland has come courtesy of a nexus of Wexner-created public-private partnerships and dark money networks that are bleeding Ohio taxpayers dry by siphoning public funds to make their technocratic vision for the state a reality, while raising the cost of living and gutting public services on which many Ohioans rely on. Despite Wexner's role in financing Jeffrey Epstein and Epstein's own role in the rise of New Albany and the public-private partnership takeover of Ohio State economic development policy, little is being done to prosecute any of the egregious corruption documented in this article. Yeah, literally. Like, it's just sad because average people then think like, oh, what am I going to do? Like, what can I do? A lot of us can do a lot when it comes to I am not even going to try and, pretend to conjure up even a percentage of a plan right now to stop corruption like this, but it's possible. I know for a fact it's possible. Need water, I'm getting dehydrated. We're at the finish line, I promise. Instead, thanks to a series of Wexner-funded governors, Wexner's master plan that started with New Albany has now been replicated through the state. Ramaswamy, despite having once said that transparency is everything, and his claims to have saved taxpayers' money at Doge, has made no mention of any plans to bring transparency to these dark money funnels that benefit Ohio's richest men on the taxpayer dime. He has not even acknowledged these systems exist yet. I mean, it's messed up that, this stuff is, out there in the open, yet, Vivek Ramaswamy wants to advocate for, certain corruption to be handled that doesn't benefit him. If corruption benefits him, he doesn't want you to look at it. If corruption doesn't benefit him, he wants it to be taken care of immediately. It's degenerosity at its finest. Like, people like that should not be allowed to have any sort of power at all. And if money and power create people like that, then we really need to rethink, how society is ran. I mean, obviously that sounds easier said than done, but it just goes to show that money and wealth, regardless if it's in a capital system or a socialist system or a communist system or an authoritative system or a system that is, reflective of that in the state of nature, money talks all the time. It doesn't matter. The paper that's been printed is insane. The paper that's been printed holds more power than any human throughout history can ever hold. So, while it is currently unknown how much more money Ramaswamy's current campaign has received from this network, his running mate Rob McCoyley has taken is that how you say that? Has taken money from Wexner's Bath and Body Works, the New Albany Company, and the consulting firm of New Albany Company partner Alex Fisher for his past campaigns. McCauley is also the chairman of the Senate Energy and Public Utilities Committee and was the lead sponsor of the SB 52, a piece of legislation that gives county commissioners new powers to kill wind or solar projects early in their development. He notably received $13,500 from Energy Industries PACs during the HB6 scandal. Ramaswamy, like DeWine and Kasich before him, is on track to continue to oversee the final stages of Ohio's transformation into the Silicon Heartland with Wexner's New Albany at its center. And yet the overarching implications of this story hardly remain that's not docile. That word isn't docile, isn't it? I'm not sure. And yet, the overarching implications of this story hardly remain whatever to just New Albany, nor the Central Ohio region. In fact, this influence nexus creeps far beyond the borders of the state, even outside the jurisdiction of the country itself. Welcome to Technate, Ohio. So this is the last section, and let's see, how many paragraphs is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 paragraphs. I'm gonna just run through these real quick. Just want to wrap this up. The localized issue downstreams of a string of data centers popping up in an Ohioan municipality are numerous. Electricity prices, dude, I hate how bad my English is sometimes. I mean, I know it's not a lot of words, but there's just words that I have not used yet in my life. I'm 30 years old, and yeah, there's English words that I have not used. Fight me. Acquired aquifer drainage strains on local governments and public infrastructure, air pollution and noise, when tax breaks and other incentives delivered by purchased state regulators are given to these server stewards of the internet's lymphatic system, to the manufacturers of autonomous war machines, to the stablecoin bankers for agnetic entities, or to the silicon brains behind AI usurping human thought. The regional conflict of interests collide with global control structures at breakneck speed. This is the conclusion of the article, so they're just going to be talking like fancy stuff, using fancy talk to conclude everything. The unfortunate example of Wexner and Epstein have made of Ohio during the last half of the century are but signposts of an encroaching technocratic theology that parasitically feeds on local hosts for the purpose of gestation and growth into a far larger and far more dangerous force. This is not to belittle the very real and tangible effects that citizens of Ohio must endure to push back upon, but rather that this is a trope of how the Technate governance structure utilizes balkanization of and the limited source of a local government as a means to pursue centralized outcomes of power within the hands of the technocratic elite. The decentralization theater that has taken rise within the talking points of the internet's most successful entrepreneurs is making the greatest centralization of power in history. One simply has to look at the business investigated in this article to see a fully realized stack of technology that can influence human behavior immensely, perhaps even to the societal level. Situated within the confines of Wexner's terrarium are banking rails for monetary weapons and mass destruction stablecoins, literal rails for building literal weapons of mass destruction, drones, and digital think tanks capable of delivering insurmountable payloads of destruction to content creation and distribution, AI. This three-pronged fork held by the very hand of the very power nexus that brought Epstein face to face with the highest levels of government figures will leave hardly a crumb for us humans to fight over on the plate of world power. This is a coup d'etat of the global order, of the very nature of humanity, actualized by a handful of men with bottomless pockets who were willing to wait decades for their plans to come to fruition. Had these conquerors simply stormed the gates of the Capitol Hill, they would have been met with the defensive force of the nation, while simultaneously revealing their now failed intentions of domination to the entire planet. The world will not be won overnight by overt kinetic force, but by synchronized maneuvers on numerous fronts over numerous decades, by a seemingly innocuous string of conveniences woven into a penitentiary. Kind of what I was explaining beforehand. These deals aren't made in the shadows, in back rooms anymore. They are strategically planned. I mean, they put it perfectly when it says the world will not be won overnight by overt kinetic force. You can't just storm the building. You can't just, run in guns blazing. These guys, know better to not run in guns blazing because they know they can't get their plans accomplished. But by synchronized maneuvers, literally like knowing where to be at the right time, at the right place, on numerous fronts over numerous decades, numerous geographic locations. Like I said, maneuvering, being at the right place at the right time, over numerous decades by a seemingly innocuous string of conveniences woven into a penitentiary. It all just seems like, it was meant to be, or, it was, it's just a coincidence that it happened like this. Like, no, it's all by design, 100%. Ramaswamy noted in the introduction of this article, spoke these quiet parts out loud upon his departure at Doge. Musk and Ramaswamy were on the same page, with the former taking the technological approach and the latter focused on a state level of governance, all in an effort to divide and conquer, to save the country. While there is little evidence of their efforts saving the country, there certainly is quite a lot of evidence that point towards a division of conquest, as exemplified by the corruption and consolidation within the Buckeye State. Long gone are the days of Alexander the Great and Attila the Hun, where peoples were enslaved and commodified by the victories of a violent land war. Today, the fronts of the New World War are at the intersections of mind and technology, where the Silicon conquistadors lay entrenched in their data centers, banks, and factories, while the internet is routinely compared to an ethereal cloud. In reality, its infrastructure remains tethered, and the physical world a cluster of chips and processes connected by wires to data centers powered by generators built on land owned, maintained and governed by humans. If this is Central Ohio's fate, if this Central Ohio fate is allowed to propose without hardly an investigation or meaningful social pushback, the outcome and impact on the world might be disastrous. Centered and maintained in New Albany, Wexner and Epstein's breakaway civilization could very well break apart civilization, leaving behind a scattering of pieces to be easily consolidated and conquered in its disruptive, technocratic wake. Jesus Christ. First of all, very long article, extremely long. Probably not the best article for me to have done as a first time for this breakdown, but my God, it is important, especially being an Ohio native, an Ohio citizen. I definitely found this very important to bring up. I found, I've been sharing it with everyone in my community. I shared it on LinkedIn. I sent it to the group chats that I'm a part of. I even shared it with my coworkers because a couple of them live in Columbus. So yeah, this concludes the episode. This episode of Table Talks being the breakdown of Technate, Ohio. Like I said, I will have, links in the description. Hopefully by the time I start rolling this 4-part episode out, I'll also have, like I said, a glossary, an index of, all the names and places and names of companies that were mentioned throughout this article, because it's all important to understand on a comprehensive level. this stuff cannot just be, swept under the rug by us average people. And that is why I will go to New Albany sooner than later to talk to the average people, not just of New Albany, but of Columbus in general too. Like I mentioned before, Columbus is like second home to me. Majority of my mom's siblings live in Columbus. Majority of my cousins live in Columbus. I still travel there, frequently as much as possible. So definitely want to get a better understanding from the actual people there and how they perceive something like this. I also, I was brought up, it was brought to my attention to go to Maysville, Kentucky too, which is about an hour and 16 minutes away from where I'm currently at, because I guess what is going on in New Albany is going on there as well. Thank you all again for, taking the time to watching, my content in general, this specific episode, 4-part series of Table Talks. We'll be back with more sooner than later. Hopefully I have an episode coming out regarding meeting Thomas Massey and getting to hear him speak. I have so many ideas I want to bring to life, so hopefully can get the ball rolling even more. Hopefully can start seeing some good stuff happen among the average communities within this world. So like I said, thank you again, and we will catch you next time. Hey everyone, thanks again for watching. It means a lot. Don't forget again to subscribe, like, dislike, leave a positive comment, leave a negative comment. I don't care. Thanks again for watching. We'll catch you next time.